Great. Hello, welcome to another episode of Justice and Trial. Today I'm joined by someone who's taken law for places most people would run from, quite literally. Kimberley Motley is a human rights lawyer, a former public defender, and the first foreign attorney who has litigated in Afghanistan's criminal courts. You have been obviously worked in war zones, prisons, courtrooms. Thank you today for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, so I thought for a good introduction, we can go right to the beginning
Okay.
about how you first got interested in law and how your legal career kind of began.
Okay. Well, I always, not always, but sorry, as a kid, I always was sort of interested in law. Like most young people, I guess. I got interested by watching TV shows, like Law and Order, and took a class when I was in high school that was really interesting regarding law and pre-law. And so that's what first really got me interested in law. Also, frankly, just growing up in a neighborhood where there were people had a lot of legal issues. It was a very humble neighborhood, but great, frankly. And so that's what first sort of indirectly made me interested in law.
Oh, wow. So you've kind of, right from the beginning, always been like kind of drawn to law. In the beginning, did you also already have like kind of an interest in doing law abroad in a foreign context, or was it kind of always first based in the US and then that kind of just came later?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think a lot of people think like there was this thing happened to me or that I witnessed and that I wanted to fight injustice. That didn't happen to me. It was really
Oh,
just informal. Like I didn't know any lawyers growing up. I didn't have that type of upbringing where I was around, legal professionals. But I will say in my household, I didn't realize how I was sort of being primed for international law. My mother is Korean, and so she's an immigrant to the US, and English was her second language. And my father is African American, and I know it's strange to say African American because I know in the UK they say British, which I wish we would
yeah.
do that. But he was in the military. And so he met my mother when he was stationed abroad in Korea. And so I grew up in an international household, but not really realizing that till later in life because it was just my upbringing. And so I just remember, sort of going around with my mother and us sitting watching Sesame Street together, her learning English. I remember, frankly, us taking her, or she's taking me to meetings and I'm serving sort of as her translator. So I think I've sort of was always taught as a young age to be articulate and to talk and be in adult conversations simply because I was always going with my mother to different places and frankly being in charge of those meetings since she wasn't 100% comfortable with English as her second language.
Wow, I think that's probably an experience that quite a lot of people have had with immigrant parents,
Mhm.
and probably resonates a lot to a lot of people. So,
Right.
what then kind of shifted you towards then later working in Afghanistan? Like, was it then you then pursuing a law degree and kind of learning about the different types of laws and then being really interested in human right law?
Well, honestly, when I went to college, I wanted to be a DJ. And I
Well,
actually did DJing. And so it just was sort of, I love music and I love parties and things like that. And so I feel like I started and I realized sort of as I was practicing how very musical litigation and law practice is. And so I started as a public defender, which is basically representing persons that could not afford a lawyer. Because in the US, constitutionally, everyone in criminal matter is entitled to an attorney constitutionally. And so I was working in the public defender's office in Wisconsin, and I loved it. Like I loved representing vulnerable clients. I loved the litigation part of it. I loved going to court. I loved listening to people's stories. I loved, frankly, making people that I think in many ways felt invisible, try to make them very visible to the world. And so there was this opportunity that someone was looking for an attorney to come to Afghanistan to sort of help train and mentor Afghan criminal defense attorneys and also to help capacity build the legal aid system in Afghanistan. And so I went as part of a U.S. Department of State justice funded program to Afghanistan to train and mentor Afghan lawyers. And so, frankly, to be completely transparent, it was a financial decision. It was an opportunity to go to a different country, which frankly, I had never traveled abroad. I'd never left the US. And so Afghanistan was my first foreign country to go to. I didn't even have a passport. I had to get a passport. And
Wow.
yeah, it was crazy. And it was having this great opportunity, but also going and making quadruple the salary that I was currently making. So it was kind of
Wow.
like, just do that for a year, then I'll come back.
Wow, I can imagine that must have been quite an interesting first stamp in your passport, having Afghanistan in there as a first stamp.
Yeah. So happy
Must have
that
been
I
quite,
was.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what then kind of shifted you to open then a private practice in Afghanistan afterwards to stay in the country instead of pursuing somewhere else or going back to the US?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be honest, like the program that I was a part of, I realized how not good it was. So because it just felt like we were going, like someone like me, it was kind of ridiculous. I got hired for this job, to be completely honest. I had no international experience. I had never traveled abroad. I didn't even have a passport, but yet I was expected as this young lawyer to go to this country and essentially tell people in the country how their legal system should work. It was ridiculous, honestly, if you think about it. And so I remember going there and frankly, and I met great people like international lawyers and Afghan lawyers, but I remember being part of this group of Americans being sent to Afghanistan, and every single other person in this program, we were sent to train prosecutors, judges, defense attorneys. Everyone else had way more experience than I did. I was the only one that I believe had zero experience. And so I remember going there and then meeting the Afghans, and I just fell in love with them, their culture, the legal system. It made me appreciate a lot of things, frankly, about the American legal system. But what's really interesting for me is everyone seemed to know, meaning I'm talking about everyone, meaning the international attorneys, not to throw them under the bus, but they seemed to know what they were doing about
Okay.
how to train, how to mentor. And I very openly was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So, what I need to do, I felt what I needed to do is I needed to see the law in action, just like a public defender. So, I went to the Afghan courts and just sat down and observed. I went to the prisons and talked to prisoners that were locked up, not realizing that when I went to the courts to just observe, and I literally was just going to the court so that I could learn because I felt like that gave me credibility to at least when I'm training other lawyers to say, this is what I observed in court, and this is how I believe the system works, and how I believe maybe what you can do to help in your practice. So when I went to court, and this program had been in existence for years and years, I was the first foreigner to go to court, which was insane. And when I went to the prisons to talk to inmates, I was the first foreign lawyer to do that, which was insane. I just assumed that everyone had done this, not realizing that me doing this was odd, and not realizing that it kind of was ruffling feathers within that program, because I think some people felt that because I was going to the courts, because I was going to prisons, that they then would have to do that as well. And frankly, a lot of people just wanted to go there and just make a bunch of money and sit in their room and drink. That was not,
Oh, it's quite a powerful approach you took there, like really immersing yourself in the system rather than kind of just going in and going like, I'll just do my job. You really immerse yourself.
right.
That's a powerful, good way to do it, I would say.
Yeah. But I didn't realize it. I didn't realize it was like so amazing. I just thought, oh, I'm just going to go to the court. No,
It's a
it
very
just,
good mind to have. It's a very
it's,
good like way to
it's common,
tackle that.
it's common sense, right?
Yeah, of course. Like you have to know what to do and see it in action before actually just jumping in and giving other people advice.
Right.
So how did you overcome then that initial culture shock? Because obviously they use now probably not, but they used to probably during your time use a hybrid of Sharia law. It was all in Pashto or Daria.
Dr. Wally.
Yeah. So how did you overcome that? And did you maybe go to like language lessons or how would you tackle that?
Well, I will say my prison visits, which I loved. I would go to the prisons and I would talk to persons that were incarcerated. And one good thing about doing that for me that I learned is that people have nothing but time, obviously. So everyone is willing to talk to you. right, about their experiences in court, what happened. And it wasn't just about talking to people that were locked up, but I wanted to talk to the guards. I talked to the cleaners. I wanted to talk to everybody. And I got a really good, for what I needed in order to have a basic understanding of how the legal system worked. And so one thing that surprised me is when I went to the prisons, I was just sort of going on the tour and just kind of, going from, cell to cell. And then all of a sudden, I hear, "Hello, how are you doing?" behind the cells. And I'm like, and I go to this door and I'm like, the first thing I said, "What are you guys doing here?" Like that's literally what I said. So what are you guys doing here? And it was two white guys locked up in an Afghan prison speaking English. One was from the UK and the other was from South Africa. And they were Bevan Campbell and Anthony Malone. And so you know, I'm on this tour with these other, and the tour that was created for me was I was there with other Americans who had been sent to Afghanistan to train and mentor Afghan prison guards on how to run the prison. And so, they were just kind of, the tour was going on and it was like only like maybe 10 people and I was the only woman on the tour. And so they quickly were like being super polite and trying to like I could just see it, and as the tour is leaving, everyone's like, okay, we got to go. It's very awkward because they want something, right? Everyone knows that they want something. And so as the tour is creeping away, they start trying to shove these papers to me, like these letters. And I'm like, no, no, no. And I was like, I can't take it. I can't take it. I'm just here to train attorneys. And I remember Bevan looking at me and he says, please help us. No one is helping us. I couldn't walk away from that. So
No.
I snatched those letters. I stuck them in my backpack without anyone looking. And then that night I was in my room and I just was reading these letters. It's as though they were waiting for me, or someone like me. And in those letters, they just told their stories of, how they went, why they think they were there. Because when they went to court, it was all in a different language and they didn't have translators.
Of
So
course.
they didn't know what their sentence was. They didn't know what happened in court. And they had both been locked up at that point for over 2 years. And
Wow.
so they were telling me about the torture and abuse that they had undergone while they were locked up, how the embassies weren't really doing anything. And to be fair, when you're charged criminally in another country, it's kind of difficult for embassies to get involved, but they do have a duty of care though to citizens.
Yeah.
And so from that, I remember then taking that information and then going to the US Embassy and like explaining about how there's these foreigners that are locked up, English speaking foreigners that are locked up, and maybe we can mentor on those cases directly because we speak the same language. And the UK Embassy should be informed because UK Embassy was taking care of British people and also people from Africa, from South Africa, and to let them know that they're there. And I remember the people in the US Embassy getting upset with me and refusing to do that. Refusing to do this isn't our problem.
Yeah.
This is your job, and I didn't realize it at the time. But from that conversation, I knew I was done with the program. Like I knew in my head, I'm done with this. And so when I quit that job, because I kept it for a year, I decided Bevan Campbell and Anthony Malone, they were my first clients. And so when I started practice, and it was literally just, let me just see if this works. I just thought, okay, I kind of understand the legal system. I read the Afghan law that says a foreigner may represent another foreigner in Afghanistan if you're duly licensed in your jurisdiction. So let me just try to help these guys. And then in sort of taking their cases pro bono, then another UK gentleman, Bill Shaw, got arrested and he worked for G4S. And Bill Shaw's an amazing person, amazing family. And so it really just kind of accidentally happened that way. And so in representing them, all of them, then I, hired a translator to work with me. And then it's a lot of it was trial and error, honestly. And so first I hired Afghan lawyers, but then I realized that doesn't work because Afghan lawyers, what do they want to do? They want to be lawyers. They don't want to be translators. You know what I mean? Which I can understand that. But then I understood also that, part of my practice was if, a translator, lawyer are two different things. And so if I wanted a translator translate sort of me litigating, and so I learned that a lot of lawyers, you really need to have a good understanding of the language in order for what I was doing
Yeah.
to help me in litigation. And so I found that the best translators for me were those that graduated college with English as their major, because a lot of legal terms don't exist in Dari and Pashto, but they are in Arabic. So it's really, and
Yeah.
some of the judges, they're Arabic speaking. And so you got to really, or they speak Arabic. And so it just was a learning by doing, and then part of the legal system. It's no different than the US, where you have this set of laws that you can use to litigate. And in Afghanistan, the set of laws to litigate in was, obviously Afghan laws, Islamic law, and also international conventions, which generally, to be honest, cares about the international conventions in the courts. But it was basically those two laws. So for me, it was natural to also litigate Islamic law / Sharia law, because
Yeah.
that's part of legal practice.
Of course. That's a very inspiring story, I think, especially because you always kind of focus on morals and your core beliefs rather
Yeah,
than kind of just following along. I think
right.
that resonates and is very important for young people to know.
Thank you.
So let's dive a bit deeper now. So you've worked across some of the most challenging legal system. So what would you say justice means to you? Or how would you define it?
Justice, I think, I would say operate off of more justness, JUSTNESS, which is
Oh, yeah, yeah.
using the laws to protect. The roles of laws is really to protect us as people or us as living beings, because we're supposed to be protecting other living things, such as the environment, such as animals, non-human animals. But the role of law for me is using the laws to protect. Now, justice is a little bit more difficult for me to define, honestly, because I think justice means different things to different people. And I don't even know
Of course.
if justice, it really means different things to different people. And also it is sort of event specific, you know, it's hard for me to just generally say, okay, this is what justice means.
No, it's a very broad term. That's why I always like to ask people because I'm like, everyone has a different answer. It's so diverse what people see themselves as what justice is. So would
Right.
you say that core belief of you to protect was something that evolved throughout your legal career that you discovered later, like that is your core belief, or that you went in straight into law going like, I'm going to do law to protect like the people, like you said, who are voiceless?
Well, I think it innately was a core belief, but I did not realize it. I mean, you just kind of like become as you're a
Yeah.
person. And I think that I do have some foundational innate beliefs, like you treat people the way you want to be treated, that everyone has a right to be heard. Um, that, Brian Stevens says this a lot, that everyone is better than their worst day. I definitely agree with that. And that, everyone has a right to be heard. And we have a responsibility, in my opinion, as human beings to really support each other for the moral, righteous way. And that's being harder and harder. People, again, that's like justice, right? People have different morals. But I do think there's some innate things that people can say, this is right and this is wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it's really been a trial and error. It really has been learning by doing. This was not something that was planned at all. And, when I started practicing law in Afghanistan, it wasn't just practicing law in the criminal courts. Like I litigated law. I was the first foreigner to litigate criminal courts. In the Afghan civil court, I litigated a trademark dispute in Afghanistan. I think I was the first person ever to litigate a trademark issue. When
I
the
can imagine.
trademark, it was insane, but extremely interesting. I litigate some family law issues. I litigated some juvenile issues. It was just really, really interesting, sort of. And this is all really thanks to Afghanistan. And even though that was like my first stamp on my passport, as you say, I'm glad it was. I love Afghanistan. And I feel like I met the world in Afghanistan. Like I never knew a British person till I went to Afghanistan. That's where I first met a person from Britain, you know, person from people from Australia. I met the world in Afghanistan, honestly.
That is not what a lot of people can say that met their first British person in Afghanistan. It's
Yes.
really crazy.
Yeah.
So you've kind of already touched on that in your answer, but so do you believe that there are universal standards of justice, or do you think justice is like inherently contextual to a specific country, maybe?
I think there are definitely some core universal values of justice. I definitely do. I think certain things like everyone has a right to exist. Everyone has a right to, for me, like everyone has a right to exist. Sadly, not everyone agrees with it, but I think most people do. But I do think there are some core universal beliefs that people have or should have, I guess, when it comes to
No,
justice.
I think that's very good. I think that should definitely be some standard
Yeah.
justice. So, are there any particular moments or stories from your career that really changed the way that you see the law or its impacts?
Yes, I have a lot of stories, definitely. But I think sort of this, okay, so I have this like one of my, before the Taliban took over Afghanistan, I remember being called to meet a woman that was locked up, or not locked up, she was in the hospital. And so she was an acid burn victim, and she had just been severely burned by her husband like days prior. And so I was asked to go and try to see if there's a way I can maybe help her legally and represent her, because obviously he needed to be held accountable for this. And so I remember, and this was like, I've been working in Afghanistan since 2008. So this was like, I'd been there over 10 years working. I developed all these relationships. And so I remember before I walked into the room, one of the doctors stopped me, and he said that, he was very polite. And he said that, unfortunately, she is going to lose her eyesight. And could you tell her? And I said, okay, I'll tell her. And so I remember going into that room, and this beautiful woman, young woman in her 20s, is laying in the bed. And she was, when you're first burned by acid, you have to let it air out, right? So there's no bandages on her. And she's like 75% of her was severely burn, and she was in severe pain. The wounds were very, very fresh. It was as though her skin had melted off her face. And I just remember how beautiful and gracious that she was. And I come into the room, and she's extremely polite. And I just started like almost, you don't want to make it about you, and I was just like, but I felt so angry. Just, I mean, just inside, like, I can't wait to get this, what I mean? And so, yeah. And so she starts getting up from the bed, and then she's like trying to get, oh, you want some tea? And I was like, stop, please stop. No, no, thank you. No, thank you. No, Tashakor, no, Tashakor. I mean, no, thank you. No, thank you. And she just couldn't help it. And she's moving. And I was like, like I should be helping you. And she did it. She got me tea, and I just, and so we started talking, and, I try to feel people out. Like in a very sensitive case like that, just because I want to hear the story right away doesn't mean that she is ready to share that story right away. I try to be very patient and really try to respect sort of the trauma a person has gone through, and knowing that they need to share their story with me when they're ready. However, sometimes it's not always cut and dry like that, because I'm like, I need the story in order for me to then do what I need to do. Right. And so she starts getting into it a little bit in terms of like what happened to her. And then at the end of her telling me what happened, and basically it was her husband's a drug dealer, and he was looking for money, and she worked on the side. And so she would hide money from him because he would take all their money and use it for drugs. And then they would need food and things like that. And so at one point he got her, he pinned her down, and with the money that she gave him before, she saw someone told her that he like bought acid, and he had hid it in the house. And so he got it and was pinning her down, and literally was slowly pouring it over her while her children were sitting there watching. And she had 3 kids, and they were all under the age of 5 years old. And so I remember her telling me that the kids were now with his parents, and that the husband had not been arrested. had not faced any consequences. And so at the end of that, she said two things to me. The first thing she said to me was, I am so glad that even though he did this, that I can still see. He did not take my eyes from me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then the second thing she said to me was she just wants to make sure that her children are safe moving forward. Like that is what's important to her. First and foremost, she wants to make sure that they're safe, that nothing happens to them, that they are able to grow up in a good environment, as good as possible, and that she doesn't want any more drama. And so because of that, and I was like, okay, what's his name? Like I was like, had already like worked, honestly, I had already like worked out the case in my head,
Yeah,
like
exactly. The
immediately.
defense already in the head.
Oh my God, you have no idea. I had already worked it out. And then basically she said, and so because of that, I don't want to go after him. I don't want you to go after him.
Thank God.
And so I just really still think about that scene. And I think just how selfless and brave she was. And as a person, as a human being, as a mom, as a warrior, for really putting herself above her kids, like really, because she knew, honestly, she knew that I could get this guy. Like she knew I could get this guy. She knew like I had worked it out. I sort of shared a little bit. She knew I could get him arrested. I could get him prosecuted. I could let his butt be in prison for years and years. However, then his kids may be retaliated against by his family. They may do something to her kids. So
Yeah.
because of that, she didn't want me to do what I wanted to do for her. And it also taught me that, again, that it's not about me. It's not about me. You know what I mean? And that my job as a lawyer sometimes is to protect people in court, obviously, but also sometimes is protect people out of court and just really to be an advisor, to provide the options, and to accept that sometimes people don't want to take the options that I want them to take, and that I am their lawyer. I'm not their life coach at the end of the
Cool.
day. Because at the end of the day, I can get a verdict, I can win in court, but they have to live with that decision. They have to.
Yeah.
And so, and also the consequence of just a grotesque form of domestic violence. And, I did tell her about what was going to happen to her sight. I felt like I'm so thankful that the doctor asked me to do that, to be honest. And I've thought about it. There still is doctor-patient privilege. However, he didn't feel like he could do that. And I get that. It's not appropriate, but he did an amazing job as her doctor and was still treating her, but he just couldn't do that because I know it hurt his heart. And so he thought it'd be good if I could tell her. And I was happy to somehow lift a little bit of the burden off of him. But it's just, it's moments where I'm not able to use the law in the way I want to, that I
Yeah.
learn the most about how it is to be a lawyer.
Of course. That's a very powerful story. I think that really shows all the misconceptions I think also spread about Afghanistan. It really shows like the true nature of the people in Afghanistan and how selfless they are to
Yeah.
the core beings. What would you think is like a key misconception you see a lot about Afghanistan now having been there so much?
There's so many. I mean, one of the misconceptions, I think people are doing a disservice to a lot of Afghans in Afghanistan and not recognizing what a beautiful country it is, how beautiful the people are. It has been an amazing and still continues to be an amazing experience to know the country, to get to know the country, to get to know the people. And I think that people miss that. And I think another misconception is there's a real Afghanistan, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. It's a very, very important country. It's an extremely important country. And I think like every country is important, right? And I think Afghanistan is really, really important. And I think a lot of people forget how Afghanistan affects them, even though they may live in a Western country. If we allow for, the Taliban to mistreat women, then if we accept that there, then we're essentially accepting it in our own backyard as well. And that,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, that's a big misconception. I think another misconception is regarding, I think a lot of people are very ignorant when it comes to like Sharia law, Islamic law. I mean, Sharia law is essentially, it's not like Sharia law. You know, I mean, Sharia law is Islamic law.
Yeah,
It's a
of course.
legal system. It's a way of practice. So within that law, there are some very conservative sort of verses in the Holy Quran, but then there's also some very non-conservative verses in the Holy Quran. And at the end of the day, just like any law, it's all about how the people interpret it. You know what
Of
I mean?
course.
It's all about
If you want to, if you want to read it directly, you can. If you want to understand like a metaphor, then you
right,
can too.
right. It's
Yeah.
just like the Bible. Like we don't sacrifice goats anymore. You know what I mean? Like people aren't doing that. So like, why do we take Sharia law like, oh, this means exactly what it says, but for the Bible, we're not doing the same thing. It's like it's not, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
interpretation. You know what I mean? And it's really like,
True.
yeah, it's just yeah. So I think that's a big misconception.
I think, yeah, you see that all the time still today in the media everywhere about the misconception about what even Sharia law is, what it means. I think that's very important that people make that distinction.
That's
So
right.
you kind of touched on this already about obviously the challenges women face in Afghanistan. Did you face more challenges being a woman there and representing them? Or I think you've already mentioned, touched on previous interviews that it actually helped you a bit being a woman litigator in Afghanistan.
hmm See, the thing that's interesting is that I don't 100% know because I don't have a male counterpart to compare myself to. You know what I
Of
mean? Like there was
course.
like,
Yeah.
another that was litigating in the Afghan courts as a foreigner, and I could say, well, he got away with this, and it was me, you know? And so I think it was an asset. I think it was an asset because I feel like I had the benefit where I could represent Afghan women and I could represent Afghan man, which I don't think a foreign man could have represented an Afghan woman in court. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like they would not, that would have been an issue, you know? Whereas me being able to represent men as well as women, I feel like I get to see more of it and understand more of what's happening and get shared information more than perhaps a foreign man would have been information that would have been shared with them, you know?
Yeah.
So I personally think, and also like as a woman, I don't know why I did air quotes. I am a woman. As a woman, no air quotes. And as a non-Afghan woman, we're allowed more allowances than an
Yeah.
Afghan would be allowed in the country.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. I think that's a very good way of looking at it. I've never really heard that. I think you always hear quite negative things as it should be of like what's happening, but I think that's a very positive way of looking at it. So to kind of like wrap it up now, what advice would you give to people who want to go into law, who want to maybe pursue human rights law and things like that?
Well, I would say that for those that want to do sort of what I do, I think really for me, it's very musical. Like, appreciate the art of litigation. Like, to me, you know, litigation, especially in the courts, is no different than being a DJ. You know, like you go into a club and the best clubs where people are dancing, right? The best DJs, they understand what they're supposed to. What they're supposed to do is that they are supposed to play music, not that necessarily that they like, but that will get the crowd to dance. You have to be selfless. And if you play the right music right, and you know, in certain clubs, some clubs like R&B, some clubs like hip hop, some clubs like house music. It's no different than a court.
Yeah.
You have to figure out your playlist for that court because your litigation is your art. It's very musical. And you have to understand what is going to make this judge dance, just like a club. What do they need to hear in order to dance? Because for me, practicing law is not just about my words. I want you to feel me. You know what I mean? I don't want you just to give me this verdict today, but I want to convince you to give this verdict to everybody after me. And I want you to hear me and feel me with my arguments. So I think understanding and appreciating the art of litigation is something that I would recommend that those that are looking to go into international human rights, sort of the way I have to do. Go to court, sit there, listen, witness it. I still do that even now. After over 20 years of practice, I just go to court and just watch people in trial because it's an education for me. And so if you want to do this, that is what has helped me. And also, I mean, learns how to do every mode of transportation, learn how to drive, learn how to drive a boat, learn how to ride a motorcycle, because you need that you just never know. I mean, if something pops off, you might need to kick somebody off their on a motorcycle and take it. You know what I mean? Like you have to think about safety too. So you should really
Yeah.
be versed in that. So, and just have fun. Just have fun. Unfortunately, the cases aren't going anywhere. So,
Yeah.
you don't have to rush it. They're still going to be there. So just, enjoy your life.
I think that's a beautiful message. I think it also, especially the advice, everyone can start by now going to a court and doing it. So I think that's a very good piece of advice that everyone can start doing right now who
Right.
wants to start. Okay, last question. So you've obviously had a very extensive, long law career with lots of different aspects. So what is one lesson you've learned throughout your whole career that really stuck with you?
Well, that's a good question. What's one lesson I learned that really sat with me is that, when I came into this, I thought the law was the tell all be all. That, oh, I'll just go in and litigate and the law, as long as they agree with me, then I'll win. I also learned how often powerless the law is and that it really comes down to people and trying to understand how you can speak the same language and humanize an issue for somebody. I've been in front of judges that have sold off their daughters in marriages and have convinced them that this marriage is not okay, even though she was sold off. And, use their experiences. Like you may have done it in this way, but this is what they did that was not correct, and really getting down to the humanness of practicing. And so that's a lesson that I continue to learn. And it's hard, you know what I mean? Because it's like I'll always be a legal warrior, but I've had to learn that sometimes law doesn't always work. Actually, a lot of times it doesn't always work.
Yeah, it's going into it and being quite idealistic. And I think throughout probably your legal career, you become more realistic, sadly, by trial and error, like you say, by trying it and seeing that it doesn't always work out.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
You know,
This really will resonate with a lot of people. Because for anyone who's thinking and wondering if law can actually make a change, I think you're a prime example in showing that I can make a change and that you can really do anything. But if you really put your mind to it, and you don't always have to have a set up plan, trial and error, like you said, can work out well too.
yeah.
So
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for your time. And honestly, this has been a great pleasure. And I think this will resonate with a lot of people.
Well, thank you for your time and for me being here. And I haven't even gotten started yet. There's a lot more to come.